Hello and welcome to uh, our webinar today. My name is Tariq Masood. I'm with ASQ Design Construction Division. Today we have Rob Estrella as our as our distinguished speaker. Rob is a nuclear quality assurance expert. He's a former U.S. Navy nuclear submarine officer, and he's currently the CEO of Blue Dragon. He has facilitated hundreds of audits, root cause analysis, and operational excellence initiatives. Rob will talk today about replacing the traditional audit checklist with a virtual AI enhanced risk based integrative framework. I want to give him the maximum time. Rob, you're on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tariq. As he said, I'm a senior fellow with ASQ. I really enjoy putting on these webinars. I do about one a month, and not only here, but in other industries as well. And I'm really happy to talk to you today about replacing your traditional audit checklist. So let me dive in. What I have for you today is about a dozen slides, take less than 10 minutes, because I want to spend the next 25 minutes talking about a virtual whiteboard. So I'm going to be going through great detail of this virtual whiteboard that I believe is the state of the art, can replace the checklist, very dynamic, very adaptable. And it's impressive how much you can do with these infinitely large virtual whiteboards. This is a billion-dollar company called Lucid. Of course, there's many others out there as well. But I like to integrate a whole bunch of things that you've traditionally known as your audit and assessment program into this process. So without further ado, let's dive in and get through some of this material. Please jot your questions down in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end. But let's get through this presentation first, and just a quick oversight. I've been in the oversight capacity for over 35 years as a Nuclear Regulatory Commission inspector on the front lines of nuclear power, as a nuclear site quality manager for 6 years. Before that, audit supervisor for 3. Before that, assessor, performance monitoring assessor. So I've been in major oversight roles most of my career. I spent 20 years in commercial nuclear power and 20 years in the Department of Energy as a senior policy advisor, solving their most complex problems and doing audits and assessments there as well. And the whole thing started in the nuclear Navy, where I was a submarine officer of the deck on ballistic missile submarines. And about 10 years ago, I started Blue Dragon, which is a world-class, very sophisticated method for assessing performance. And I have some, well, at least one example to show you about that. Okay, so moving on. What we'd like to go through today is why our oversight audit and assessment programs should be modernized. And I lay out the fact that most of us have static checklists. That is, they're not dynamically changing or shifting with our dynamic threat profiles. So more on that. And I'd like to introduce a virtual storyboard that is dynamic and can be easily modified to keep up with our shifting threat profiles, which means we have to be risk informed and we have to do a little bit of investigation, almost like a detective or a doctor. And of course, we want to bring in artificial intelligence. So some examples of that as well. So this is what we're about today. And I hope you get a lot out of this, even though it's a very, very short presentation. I have much more material than we could possibly cover here. So I welcome you to reach out after all this. And of course, you can have the PowerPoint and a link to that whiteboard I just showed you. But first, what is it that makes it inevitable that we change? And I bring you this. Who remembers the 8-track or the cassette player or the CDs even, or the famous iPod? Yeah, all of that was replaced by one device, right? The modern cell phone. And just to rub it in, what happened to Blockbuster and all the brick and mortar stores? Right, they didn't pay attention to the winds, and there we go. Netflix and other streaming companies took them out of service. So why haven't we changed the way we do audits and assessments is my point to you, because we have a serious number of threats and challenges. First and foremost, in my opinion, is cybersecurity, right? Well, are we auditing our programs, processes, procedures? against cybersecurity threats? Do we have checklists to make sure we're protected? Do we have adequate defenses in place in our organizations, whether they're small or large? Okay, so there's other things you see on the board here that are really giving us a pressure cooker. Our organizations and the people, the humans within the organizations are in a pressure cooker with all of these things, not the least of which is now we have artificial intelligence and machine learning. So all of these are really sort of driving forces for us to change. But right now, a lot of organizations have the same tired, static checklist. Are they really able to keep up? How often do we update our checklist? As an example, most of the places where I work, we use ISO 9001 or even higher NQA1. But do you hear anything about cybersecurity risks there? And do we do audits and assessments on cybersecurity? Are our QA programs adapting fast enough? I don't know. That's for each one of you to decide. But here's something that I want to ask all of our quality assurance organizations that are on the line here today. Has the line management ever accused you of just being a check the box kind of organization? That is, all you do is go out, you see what's wrong, you circle the bullet holes. Well, hey, you didn't follow this requirement. Or hey, this went wrong. Let me write it down and give you a finding, right? Some call it drawing a chalk outline around a dead body. That is not very effective oversight if that's all you're doing, right? Getting a checklist. Did you have a procedure? Yes. Oh, you didn't have a procedure. Or, oh, you didn't meet this requirement. That's way too shallow in today's environment. That's not a value add. In fact, that's not good business because the resources that we provide in oversight really have to be maximized into finding and closing gaps. So more on that. All right. So now let's talk about what I really want to get into is how to establish a very dynamic, scalable, risk-informed approach to audits and assessments. So let's talk about this. Why don't we build it out from scratch? Let's make it lean so that we're not wasting any energy. Let's make it agile, make it really efficient. So we do one thing on one giant board, and it's also virtual. So we can have a lot of people working on this at the same time. It's scalable. So we can adapt it to small, medium, large, and I'm going to give you an example of a wicked large problem. How about risk-based, where we can use this to conduct proactive assessments, where we see, let's say, negative trends cropping up. If we're actually monitoring our corrective action program database and doing some trending and analysis on our CAP data. And then something that I hope is starting to catch on, we have to go past writing findings on the initial symptoms, right? Think like a doctor. Why would you cure the high temperature or the high blood pressure on a patient? You need to understand what's causing that high temperature or high blood pressure. So you got to think like a doctor and understand that you have to ask, why is this happening? Go a little bit deeper before you write your findings. That's what we're going to walk through in the example. And now, why don't we take advantage of modern technology? We have artificial intelligence. I'd like to share with you something that we were just doing in the last few weeks. So I have real-time examples of how to bring in artificial intelligence into the whole equation. So this is what we have done here at Blue Dragon. I wanted to share it with you all because, again, a lot of this was developed while I was in quality assurance at a nuclear power plant. And now I've used it across the nuclear weapons industry, the National Science Laboratories for the Department of Energy, and of course, the commercial nuclear power plants. So let's build a model and understand that we want to shift from where we've been classically, which is compliance-based oversight. Now, this is the straightforward, here's my requirement, did you meet it? And then if not, you write the finding. If you're still stuck there, you are in the Stone Age. You are a dinosaur. Most organizations are now at least gravitating towards performance-based oversight, where you go in the field. You don't sit at a desk. You don't fly your desk. You go in the field, you look and see what's going on, and you try to capture the behaviors that you're seeing that are not following the high standards of excellence that your organization has in place, right? So at least go that far. Well, now we have to evolve even more. We have to actually look at the high-risk activities in our organization and get out in front of them. In other words, go assess the area, before they have a chance to launch into some activity which is high risk, which can result in major problems or events. So when you're doing this, now you're heading off issues before they even start. And this is where training and analysis fits in. And last but not least, investigation-based oversight, which is where you don't simply point out the obvious, point out the symptom. I recall that funny commercial where there's a bank guard, and he's just standing there while the bank's getting robbed, and they say, "Hey, do something. The bank's getting robbed." He says, "No, my job is just to monitor." "Oh, your bank's getting robbed." I thought that was a funny commercial because that highlights what a lot of us in oversight are used to seeing, and it's not effective, it's not productive. So speaking of risk-based oversight, let's throw up this bow tie risk assessment model, which I've redrawn here, a really excellent tool that helps me explain what is going on. So if I can just have you focus in the middle here, look in the middle. If you have a problem, an event, an issue, an organizational breakdown, well, a lot of things had to have happened for us to get there, because most of us have a whole line of defenses, especially if you have a QA program. You have administrative requirements, right? Programs, processes, procedures, training, all of that. And then you have physical barriers, right? In terms of personnel protective equipment. And if you have some kind of a high risk environment, you might have barriers like lead shielding to protect you from radiation. And then you have cyber controls, right? To keep and safeguard our data. So all of those form a line of defenses that protect us from the threats that we know are out there. Okay, so for a single problem to happen in our heavily regulated environments, a lot of defenses failed. Not one, a lot of defenses had to have failed. So whenever we have the chance, we need to be trending and analyzing these moderate and minor issues so that we can establish through Pareto analysis, for example, what the big hitters are. Where are we seeing serious issues crop up? And now that we identify a negative trend, we can actually do things like put out a proactive audit or assessment that goes to find the gaps in those negative trends and close those gaps. So we continue to strengthen our defenses. That's how you stay proactive. That's how you get into continuous improvement. And that's where we would actually want to be, on the left side, the proactive side of the risk assessment model, not on the right side where we wait till there's a problem and then we write the finding, and then we actually end up on a reactive mode trying to shore up and mitigate those consequences. All right. Of course, there's much more to this, and I really just want to get to the virtual whiteboard so that we can go and give you an example of what a modern thing might look like. So, all right. So here we have, again, Lucid. It's a company. Look it up. They sell licenses at $450 a year for a suite of things, but extremely powerful. So let me go through, and what we have here are 2 phases of a 3-phase approach. But for your sake, I'm just going to talk about these 2 phases. First is the phase where we gather, organize all kinds of information, and this is going to replace our checklist. And the second phase is where we go a little bit deeper than the symptom, right? So here we go. Let's first of all think like a doctor. So why don't we get used to thinking that, all right, when we find issues, we're not just going to issue a finding on the initial problem, right? We're going to think like a doctor and understand that those are merely symptoms. They're symptomatic of something deeper. And what are the symptoms? Deviations, nonconformances, noncompliance with requirements. All of those are mere symptoms of something deeper. Why don't we dig a little deeper before we write the finding? So that's part of the premise here. So in general, I'm going to walk you through a case study here just to give you a sense of how this might flow. So if we're out to do a performance assessment on maintenance practices at the Acme machine shop, all right, well, we have to understand what the field of play is. And if we bring in some systems theory, understand that whatever we look at can be treated as a system, we look for the elements that make that system work. So we do a systems inventory and say, okay, if we're doing a maintenance program assessment, what is it that I need to look for? All right, conduct of maintenance. We need an industrial safety program to keep the workers protected from high hazards. We need the training program for the mechanics and the supervisors. Let's say a stock work procedure and a management observation program to make sure that supervisors are in the field reinforcing desired behaviors. So we do this systems inventory to understand this needs to be in place to have a successful outcome. What are my requirements now? So now I can bring in, let's say to a shared drive, these procedures. Bring me these documentations. If there's an actual work order, bring in the work order. So now we have the requirements, the administrative requirements. If there's any physical type of defenses in place, we can also bring this in, things like protective equipment. We want to know if these were effective and doing their job, right? Is that the right equipment for the job? Was it used properly? And in this simple case, if we're looking at safety in a machine shop, these are the kind of things that I expect to see. So why don't I evaluate how well these work? Okay. If I interface with pieces of equipment that could hurt me, let's look at the interface with these pieces of equipment. So I can bring those in as well. So I'm gathering information all along the way. And if I have data, I'll talk more about this, but if I have data like key performance indicators, or perhaps I have control charts in place that monitor equipment performance. Perhaps I can get some Pareto analysis of the corrective action program with respect to maintenance shop industrial safety issues. So why don't I put those up? I'm going to give you a lot of detail on this in a second. And how can I use artificial intelligence? And how should I not use artificial intelligence? So more on that here in a little bit. Okay, so let's start here. I did my systems inventory, right? I did my systems inventory. And from there, I come down here and I know that I have all kinds of requirements. Let's say I have 10 procedures. How many requirements per procedure? 20, 40, 50, 60, 100. I'm not going to use the entire procedure or all of these 10 procedures as a checklist. We tend to do that, right? Are we meeting all the requirements of this procedure? That's too much. Let's be more efficient, more precise, more laser-like. And so now let's go gather performance evidence. What's going on in the machine shop? And this is where performance-based assessments and auditing comes in, right? Let's go observe the behaviors. And we did that. And when we go out there to observe what's actually happening, the behaviors that are taking place in this machine shop, we see that mechanics are not wearing eye protection, and they're not wearing steel-toe shoes, or wearing their hard hats, or wearing their leather gloves, and they're working alone with power tools, and all of these things are coming to light, right? So is that my finding? All right, so let me show you what perhaps might come out of it in a classic situation. The findings might be grouped like this. Finding one, they're not complying with PPE requirements. And finding number two, they're not complying with the use of high-powered tools that could hurt them. And that's what we throw out there, and we let them fumble around with the corrective actions. We didn't really solve much because we're going to probably blame, shame, and retrain, the classic corrective action, right? We're going to talk to the mechanics that didn't do this right. We're going to fix those mechanics. The requirements are already in place, so why would we change requirements? In fact, we might end up adding a note to, adding more requirements, more notes, more precautions, more limitations. And that's just adding more administrative to the process, which does not solve a problem. We're not getting to the real issues. So why don't we go and try a new approach? Now that I've got my performance evidence, this is where I create a dynamic checklist. So for my systems inventory, I have my complete list of defenses, the procedures in place. And if I have cyber control software as well, fine. But now instead of my tired standard checklist, I'm going to bring in those precise requirements that have to do with the performance that I've observed. So I know that I should be wearing eye protection because the safety program says so. And the safety program has information on steel-toe shoes and hard hats and leather gloves and miter saws with blade guards and power tools with frayed electrical cords. We have all these things. We have mechanical training program. We have conduct and maintenance requirements. We have management observation programs that make sure the supervisors are actually reinforcing the behaviors. Why aren't the supervisors seeing these negative behaviors out in the field? right? And perhaps the corrective action program Pareto analysis shows us there's a trend there as well. If we were trending and analyzing, we'd write a question there as well. And now we can write questions based on evidence as how come we were using this power tool without a blade guard? We could write questions about why are mechanics using the power drills with frayed electrical cords? Why are they not wearing this equipment properly? All these questions are called lines of inquiry. And what we're actually doing is what used to be called a hazards, barriers, targets analysis, or a barrier analysis, or a barrier table. We're doing it seamlessly here. So we're actually in stride, taking a look at their requirements. This is what should have happened. The evidence, this is what actually happened. We look for the deltas. The deltas we call symptoms. And now we're going to write lines of inquiry questions that are focused on the symptoms, right? So we're not just going to group these symptoms into two findings as we might have been doing in the past. They're the starting points for lines of inquiry, right? So we're going to generate really good lines of inquiry questions to go a little deeper, right? This is investigative. And before that, by looking at what's actually happening in the field, this is risk informed. We're looking for the activities that are taking place so we can be risk informed. What are the real-time risks that we're experiencing? And now let's get into the investigative phase. Now that I have my questions generated, let's go to the next phase, which is let's talk to people and ask these questions. Now, we've learned over time, if you like the fishbone and you remember the basic bones on the fishbone, and even more than that, the anatomy of an event from my industry, it's nice to look at things in terms of behavioral analysis, which are what at-risk behaviors do we observe where the humans place themselves or others at risk, and what are the error likely situations where the organization, the environment they were working in, put the workers at risk. So there's things like time pressure and such. So now, in order to do this even more effectively, we have a tool that we use all the time. It is called an error likely situation survey. And every time there's a human involved with an incident, we put this out. We want to know if there were, for example, task demands that cause an error likely situation, like we put people under serious time pressure. And perhaps something else, one of these things, high workload, interpretation requirements. This list has been around for a long time from post 3 Mile Island on the commercial nuclear side. And now there's a process called Human Organizational Performance, HOP. And they're using this exact same checklist. Now we can turn this into, and we have a survey that comes out of this that defines each one of these. And we let the staff tell us that this is what's going on. And if there are, we can ask questions about it. Okay? So we can look at what's driving behaviors. Is it an at-risk behavior? I'm not wearing my PPE. Or it's an error likely situation created by the work environment, i.e. there was too much pressure on the humans to do the job. So that's what behavioral analysis, and that is huge because that really helps us understand that people don't show up and purposely make mistakes. Behaviors are typically driven, adverse behaviors are typically driven by external pressures. We need to understand what drove it. If we simply put a finding on the mistakes that people made, you will cause management to target those individuals. We don't want that. We want to have a dialogue about what's causing these issues. And when the personnel who are involved work with you, they're going to love this. They're going to see that the deeper we go, the further we are from actually blaming, shaming, retraining the individuals. All right. So let me go through these themes. We have, if it doesn't fit into the behavioral analysis, we can fit them here under programs, processes, and procedures. So we look at the applicable program standards that weren't met. And we also have equipment interface, tools, materials, and equipment. And we have management control systems like supervisors in the field. All right, so let's go through some of these and see what we end up with and see what all these colors mean. All right, so we start with a session, a focus group, and ask the mechanics, so why aren't mechanics wearing eye protection when working with power tools or steel-toed shoes? And we start to get some interesting answers. Well, management doesn't seem to care. They don't ask about safety, only about cost and schedule. Their emphasis is on production more than safety. And over here, why aren't the supervisors enforcing the rules? Well, they're stuck in their offices doing admin. They're never in the field because there's not enough of them, and management is not filling open positions. Now, we look at these color post-its, we see that these themes continuously show up on our chart. These are called common causes, right? Management emphasis on production more than safety. That is a great finding, not the fact that a human made a mistake. Shortage of supervisors in the field reinforcing desired behaviors because management is not filling open positions. That is a great finding. Let's go on. So if we look a little bit further here, why aren't there working hard hats under scaffolding? Well, the answers we got here led us to understand that we don't get refresher training anymore. That's been de-emphasized, and training is no longer considered a top priority. We would love to know why, and that's where the finding lies. And if that happens again, and we see it over here, yes, it happened again when we talked about mechanic training, they stopped giving us refresher training. It was discontinued to save money, and it didn't contribute to production goals, which is that emphasis of production over safety. That's why it's tagged to that common cause. And over here, new management came in, de-emphasized training, not considered a top priority, right? And that is another common causal factor. So you see that third one showing up here, training not considered a high priority. That's a great finding. And now just for fun, I threw this one in here. What was the pressure, the error likely situation that the crew was working under? And we did that behavioral survey, and it came out that they felt a lot of pressure. They were distracted and they were making bad assumptions. At the heart of it is they were told to work on Christmas Eve without any support, right? No supervision. They were told they could go home as soon as they finish this job. They want to get home to family and Christmas Eve kind of activities. So they rushed through it and they blew it. So working on Christmas Eve, which is a holiday with no support, is a problem. That is a great finding. We would like to know why and how is management doing this. There's probably minimum staffing requirements to do work that were not met. That's a better finding for the organization to work on. And now let's look at even more things that come out. Over here, we have, why are mechanics working alone when the requirement is to have a buddy system? Well, when we asked that question, they don't like the buddy system. The union leadership actually told them not to use it because it was a model designed to rat each other out. At least it seems like it's being used for punitive measures by management. Well, that sounds like a good finding. You can't have the union telling folks to violate requirements. There's something deeper than that should be explored, and that's a really good gap to close, because what else is the union leadership telling the workers not to follow? And one other loose end over here, the equipment was checked out without a miter saw blade guard and frayed electrical cords, and it turns out no one is manning the equipment checkout counter because it's a collateral duty. It's a volunteer position, and it's not in the labor contract and not funded, right? So there's an issue there because it not only affects this one thing with this one individual we saw, this is probably affecting a lot more than just this. And that is a great finding. Let's close that gap. And the other reason is supervisors aren't out there looking for these safety violations because they're stuck in their office, etc., right? The common cause. So you see how this very quickly, in very short order, after a quick session or two, asking some good questions, some focused evidence-based questions, you get to some real issues. Here's 6 findings. Compare that to the old school findings. So I wanted to get that point across, that we're not doing ourselves a lot of favors by doing the old traditional checklist. So to really big picture, we understand what the requirements are for the particular system we're looking at, do a systems inventory. We get our requirements ready to go. We look at performance, so it's performance-based, and we focus on the risky performance. Now we're risk-informed. Now we generate great questions about where we're not meeting the requirements, the deltas, the symptoms. And now we ask those questions to get a little deeper, just a few questions deep, and find out some really good issues. That's where the findings should go. So there we go. Now let's talk about AI. Let's talk about AI. And the best way to do it is by showing you a recent assessment. Now, this is an assessment of an entire nuclear plant in Ohio. This is a massive assessment. It's a 6-week assessment. So it's not your typical couple of things going on here. So I've been working on this the last 5 weeks. Just happens to be what I'm doing real time right now. And we're looking at the performance at a nuclear power plant back to 2017. So there's a lot of information. If you just look at the systems inventory for this, it is huge. There are hundreds of procedures and requirements that we had to gather and put in a shared drive. There's equipment issues. And if you see some of these equipment performance lines, there's equipment issues dating all the way back, including reactor scrams and derates and forced outages, things like that. So there's a lot of high-risk performance going on. You see here the analysis of defenses, the requirements, and the questions. You see here the asking of those questions. This is very deep, though. So not expecting anyone to do this level of performance. But I wanted to get to the data. This is the data that we analyzed. So how do we use AI? All right. So we had a CAP database, one database of 17,000 condition reports, another one with 9,000 condition reports. And very quickly, by sorting on several of the cost codes, and this one is called INPO cost codes, I had 5,456 condition reports that we analyzed by cost codes. And you see here very clearly where the salient points are. And now that's the first tier. Now we take these and go to second tier Pareto charts. Each one of those is also further analyzed into tier 2. So this is the equipment reliability Pareto chart, and then reactivity management, and then foreign material exclusions, and operational risk, and so on. And you see the salient points of each of these. So now from the tier 2, we have and even more insights. And now we go to tier 3. So what did we do? I used Excel with Copilot. And I turned on the Copilot function and said, I want you to use Python coding and do some really good analysis of this and draw me a histogram and put the numbers, the values on top of each bar and organize them from tall to small. So I've just programmed AI on Excel Copilot to use Python coding and get me these charts. Now, when I come over here, what I did here was, for example, in this one, we had about 450 of the first bar and about 250 of the second bar. Well, I took the first 450 condition reports and I took their descriptions and I copied the descriptions into, again, the Microsoft Copilot researcher online. So the researcher function works phenomenal. And I had it analyze all these 450 and tell me what the patterns are, tell me what the issues are, tell me in 2 different phases of performance what this is telling me. And so with AI, it gave me a phenomenal set of information about exactly what was going on with respect to this particular functional area. So, and this was done very efficiently. Now you validate it, of course, but the results are impressive. And all this is done in a matter of hours, not weeks and days, right? So we're doing that. Here's another set, more analysis. Okay, so that's Excel Copilot with either ChatGPT or Copilot researcher. And then you can also just take reports, for example. Here are reports in 3 different time frames. And I had AI analyze the 3 reports and look for commonalities. What are the recurring issues every 2 years that are taking place from this kind of activity? And I get phenomenal reports, right? Here's the report that came out. And this is the use of AI. You have data, you can give it data. You can do calculations. You can do number crunching. You can look for patterns in different procedures or reports. So that is a good use of AI. Now, what is not a good use of AI? Let me go back to my original chart. AI cannot be used when you have to talk to people and find out what is causing their behaviors. AI cannot read body language. It cannot replace a facilitator. It cannot read the temperature in the room. It can't stop someone from trying to dominate the discussion. So you still have to validate the results you get from AI when you're looking at data. But in this phase, when you're interviewing folks or doing focus groups like I like to do, AI cannot replace the human. So there's a limitation to what AI can do for you. And here's the worst mistake you can make. You plug in all this information. Here's my requirements. Here's what went wrong. Give me the deep-seated issues. AI can't do that because it's going to give you a generic answer. You have to talk to the humans in that system, right? You might have two stations, same exact procedures, different sets of humans. You're going to have different outcomes. So you have to look at the system that you're analyzing, assessing, or auditing uh, as an individual system and not take a generic answer from AI as to, with these issues, this is what must be wrong. No, AI cannot cut the corner for you. You have to talk to the humans in the system to get to what's really going on. That is my advice to you, or warning to not jump into AI and just willy-nilly think that it's going to give you all the answers. So with that, as a demonstration, I want to give you some conclusions. You have to embrace change or you will be obsolete. You don't want to just tell your people to work harder, dig deeper. You should be taking advantage of modern technology and changing the model, the way you do business. And here's an example of how we modernized using audits and assessments, using virtual whiteboards and systems theory and a few other things that are baked into that that you can't even tell. Comparative timeline analysis, change analysis, task analysis, barrier analysis, all that's built into what you just saw. This will actually help you cultivate a culture of innovation. And why don't you get outside your bubble and start looking around to see who's using these modern techniques, technologies, and bring them in. Again, embrace risk, embrace change or risk obsolescence. And I'll leave you with this. For breakthrough performance, you really have to break the status quo. You want to reach another level of performance, you have to understand that doing it the same way, expecting different results is not going to work. So to close it out, back to our original learning objectives, hey, I think you should modernize the way you're using your traditional checklist. Here's a great way to do it with state-of-the-art virtual whiteboards, but also strategies to be more risk-informed, more investigative in nature, come up with better findings. You will add more value to the organization. You will be seen as a net positive sum gain. In other words, if they're spending money on your salaries for an oversight group, but answering the dumb findings that come out of an organization, and I'll just use dumb generically, findings that don't matter much, that don't move the needle, that's a negative sum gain, right? We're paying your salaries, plus it's costing us to look at things that don't matter much and don't move the needle. Let's make it a positive sum gain by adding value, by getting them to address deeper issues that they didn't know were there or that are worth addressing and will prevent many future issues from happening. That's a high value add. Your organization will be much more appreciated when you do business that way. And with that, I will conclude and take your questions.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you so much, Rob, for such a great presentation. We have several questions. I'm going to try to summarize a couple of them. I think the first one I have is, the way that you describe the findings is seems to be different from a traditional definition. I mean, traditional definition is you write a finding against a requirement. You don't write a finding against something that, as an auditor, you would like to see. So the comment I saw from Stella was that these are observations. These are not findings. The real question is why they are not wearing the PPE, or they are not following the tooling requirements. And you get into that in your presentation. I saw that you are describing the behavior aspect of it. So if I may summarize the question that I have from the chat, as an auditor, how do you issue a finding? how do you actually issue a finding if the requirement is not there?
Okay, what a fantastic question. So as a site quality manager, those are the kind of questions I faced. And so here's what you have to understand. There is a requirement for everything we looked into. We started with the requirement, right? And so the anchor point for my question, my first question, why did you not wear eye protection? We have a requirement for that. Now, the thing that happens though is that when you can take it a little bit deeper and go into these are the issues driving that problem that didn't meet the standards, that's what the value is to the organization. So now what I'm asking you to do is change the model and do it past the point where you're just barely meeting the minimum standards of what the audit process requires you to do. Because guess what? With my 35 years of experience in oversight, that is antiquated, and the oversight organizations that do that aren't doing much value to the organization. They're circling the bullet holes, drawing chalk outlines around dead bodies. And so here's the thing. I took a risk. I took a risk and started doing business this way. And guess what? Not only did they appreciate it, the real story is that we became known as one of the best oversight organizations in the United States per the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. And then the World Association of Nuclear Operators saw what we were doing and asked me to help Slovenia and South Africa. So to tell you that this is the future and this is where you should be going, I'm not underestimating the value of doing business this way. They will thank you for it. You will be heading things off, preventing issues, which is a money saver, right? And not only a money saver, but you might be saving lives by preventing safety issues down the road. You might be saving regulatory risk or reducing regulatory risk by doing business this way. So you got to not get hung up on the fact that some management want to box you into just tell me what the requirement is and what it didn't meet. That is dinosaur, Stone Age way of thinking here. I'm telling you what the modern way of thinking is. You got to change the status quo. You got to get past that compliance based. That was at the bottom of the pyramid. Did you see that? That compliance-based pyramid was the worst of the worst. You don't want to be stuck in the mud.
Compliance is not excellence, as they always say. Compliance is really minimum requirements. Excellence is best standards. So those are the two different things. What you are presenting is a way to go to excellence, and I really applaud that. Thank you. I guess another question I have in the short amount of time, this is a question from McDonald. As an auditor, how do you investigate a phase without introducing bias, such as steering the decision towards a corrective action? And I would add to that is that, this is kind of implying it is an internal audit, because in an internal audit, you still, steer towards a known resolution. In an external audit, an auditor's job is only to identify what the problem is that he or she identified and let the auditee organization address it and do the root cause. What is your opinion?
Yeah, terrific question. So when I built this model out, I explicitly went to eliminate bias. And the way that's done is you cannot ask a question that's not grounded on a requirement and a specific deviation. So you're not allowed to ask curiosity questions, nothing. You're asking a question that specifically says the safety program requires eye protection. The evidence is that eye protection was not worn. We're going to ask, why was eye protection not worn, and take it to where that takes me. It turns out we're going to find things when you do an analysis of this sort, which doesn't take a lot of time, that you're going to get to some deeper seated issues, which are serious issues that need to be addressed. So get out of that compliance mode where you're just told to just tell me that I wasn't wearing eye protection. That's easy to fix. Tell the people, blame, shame, retrain. Tell the people to wear eye protection. You solve nothing, you fix nothing, you prevent nothing in the future. That is antiquated, low value way of audits and assessments. And I can't tell you enough from, again, 35 years. Oh, by the way, when I did this at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I became one of the top 10 inspectors in the United States. I was given a meritorious achievement nomination after only 3 years on the front lines of a power plant because I was doing my oversight in this manner. So I have to emphasize what risk-based and investigative-based oversight will do for you and for your success and for the organization's success.
Perfect. We have the last 2 minutes. I think I'm going to conclude here. Thank you so much for all the questions and for attending. One of the things that I got from this presentation is, I think what you are implying, and hopefully a lot of people will agree to this, as moving from compliance-based auditing to excellence-based auditing really requires a mind shift. It requires you to move away from this, what is called a checklist syndrome. It's not in the checklist. I'm not going to ask the question. In front of you
Right.
is an elephant in the room, but it's not on the checklist. You don't ask a question. What this presentation gives us is to really follow the trail. You see what is important, what is happening, and as an auditor, you are not supposed to audit everything. It is a sample, and you are going to sample what
Right.
you think is the most pertinent question, because this is what you observed and you follow the trail. And I think this is what I got out of it. So I appreciate this presentation. Great presentation, Rob. We will have these. If you have further questions, please write them down. We will try to get some answers. And as always, thank you so much for attending this session. We are out of time. Thank you one more time again. Bye bye.
Thank you, Tariq. Appreciate that wrap up. All right, everyone. You're welcome to contact me as well for other questions.